January 18, 2022, Board of Education special meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. Roll call.
Glenn Myers. Here. Ashley Butler. Here. David Castro. Here. Evan Powell. Here. Keith Sebastian. Here. Natalia Shaw.
Here.
Josie Shadow. Here. Warren present.
Pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public participation. Members of the audience are encouraged to make comments and ask questions of the board consistent with Board Policy 2:230. Please identify yourself and limit your presentation to 3 minutes. Seeing none, we will move on. May I have a motion to award the lowest responsible bidder for the Phase 1 project? Barclay?
Second.
Dave? Discussion.
So we are pleased to have with us tonight Terry Fielderman from ICI, our construction manager. He is ready to speak to the board tonight about the bids we received for the 14 different trade areas. I'll turn it over to Terry to let him speak for a moment.
It was a relatively good bid cycle. We had good participation, over 50 bids. You'll see in the packet there was a couple of bidders we had to excuse because they missed the scope. By and large, the bidders are very competitive. We feel we have good contractors. Scope review is good, and it should serve the district well.
Questions? What's the feedback on procurement?
So the procurement looks pretty stable at the moment. But we have the announcement letters ready to go this evening. As soon as I walk out, I'll text my assistant. She'll send out the notices to the contractors, and they'll start the shop drawing process in the morning. So the key things we're worried about are going to be windows, which we have to watch very closely because there's a long lead time on that. They're currently 20 weeks, so it's going to have to be something we have to be really focused on. And we're going to watch steel decking. That was the other thing that came up in scope review, is something to look at.
What was the second thing?
The second thing was the metal deck. The roof deck, if you look at above the metal deck, that appears to be the hardest thing to get steel wise. Originally, we had designed in the project bar joist for the addition, but in consultation with White, we asked them to switch it to W flanges rather than the joist you see up there, because on the W flanges, there's a less lead time. Obviously, COVID is going to remain a factor for some time, and when you watch the news, you can see the disruption in the supply chain. We'll be watching it as well too to see if anything comes up, and we'll keep that view informed.
What is the total amount that adds up to all these bids?
Well, I don't know off the top of my head. It's just over 5.
Just over 5.1 million.
What about doors, frames, and hardware?
There was no comment on that as far as lead time goes, but we'll get those shop drawings processed as soon as possible.
I've heard in the last 2 weeks that how frames 20 weeks now.
It could be, but the interior partitions are mostly metal stud, so there's something we'll be able to work around if it does come down to that. We don't have any masonry walls to deal with as far as that goes for hollow metal frames, which usually creates bigger issues.
It's obviously the biggest challenge, and we knew this even when we're going to go down this path. Usually it's money, and it always still is. But the other thing was like, is it even feasible to really get this done and have it open in August?
So
because any one material could throw that whole thing off, as you know.
That is correct. Any one delay or weather delays could be a factor on this job too. We get a hard polar vortex like we had a couple of years ago, it will make it difficult to start this project, which will then make it difficult to finish. So we are going to work very aggressively with the subcontractors to get the submittals in and hopefully work out any material problems that we might have along the way. And then we're going to have to work against the weather. But again, we collaborated with White Instead of doing a masonry bearing project, we did a steel frame, which will allow us to work in severe cold weather, or sometimes even in the rain. And the exterior walls are, it will be a high performance metal stud wall, which will allow us to work while the roofing's going on and keep going with the project. Masonry bearing takes a lot longer than this process does.
I will also add that there are parts of this project where we have planned overtime and longer days and some Saturdays just to make sure certain of the trades that are maybe more challenging to get done have plenty of time. We have allocated for that in almost every one of the individual bids as well as the overall project.
Overtime, that's correct. Overtime was purchased, but also multiple crews. So the trade contractors will have to be in various areas of the building at the same time. So they won't be able to work like in one area and then go to the next. They'll be working simultaneously inside the building in multiple areas. And again, this wasn't discussed with White, but I will give White credit. The way the building lays out with partition-wise and the classroom clusters, it will allow for multiple crews to be working there at the same time.
So the drawings are complete, are they permit drawings? We were waiting on any other drawing issuance, or we're ready right now?
Yes, so is my mic on? Yeah. So we're in the process of getting the regional office of education permit set together. We, as you might know, maybe you don't, the regional office of education requires third-party plan review and certification during construction. So the third-party plan review is complete. We've received all their comments. We're actually going to issue back to them just to confirm they acknowledge any very minor adjustments. We will then, and of course, during the bidding process, we issued addendum. So we will put together what's called the issue for construction set, and then that will be issued to the Regional Office of Education for the building permit. There are also the stormwater permit and a couple other site/civil related permits that are underway, that will be submitted in short notice here.
So your IFC drawings already have the ROE's comments incorporated into them?
They have, so the company that did the third-party review is called BNF. And so they are basically a code review company. They do both plan review as well as on-site inspections because the local authorities do not do any of that review. So there will be, the regional offices, when they approve a set, they do a cursory review. They do have an architect take a look at it, but we usually receive pretty minor comments, and that reviewer does not certify the plan review. BNF Code Services does.
So it should be faster though as well.
Yeah, and I think we can, I mean, we've been in pretty good contact with the regional office about this project, so they know it's coming, but we'll make that extra step of, scheduling that time.
So what's the targeted start date for actually construction?
Early March. Second week of March, depending upon the weather. We did buy 18 inches of frost stripping with the base bid, so hopefully it's typically what it is in March, but see how that goes.
Regarding alternate number 2, base bid on excavation, why is that lower than the base bid? I think that was a higher.
Well, taking the alternate removes money from the base bid. That's why it's reduced.
Explain it again, I'm not understanding.
Sure. So the base bid for DK contractors was $395,000, 83. Alternate 2 was a deduct of $63.29. And the reason is because there was concrete pipe from the storm sewer, and we substituted out each high density polyethylene, which is a plastic pipe.
Okay, so you changed.
It allows for a little faster installation and tends not to settle as much over time. So that's why we took that alternate.
I don't know anything about the alternate alternative material that you just said, the downside, what's your downside in using that?
The high density poly, well, we use high density polyethylene, more than we use concrete pipe these days. So, there's a belief that the interior scratches and so forth, but we've been using it for over a decade, haven't really had fallbacks with the pipe, so it tends to stay a little cleaner than concrete pipe. So that's why most excavators like it, it's second to those guys. Plus the installation is a little bit easier and faster, so it's a little more time saving because when the pieces fit together, there's a gasket inside the pipe, and it just push it together as opposed to concrete pipe, which has to be a little more gingerly sealed.
Was there a reason why we had concrete pipe in there to begin with? Might predate me being on board.
That's a question you would have to direct that to whoever at White and Company created that particular part of the plan.
But both are interchangeable. It's really, it's at the discretion of the engineer. But it's a common question for excavators to ask, can you switch to this pipe for various reasons? And some of them are, this bidder is low, we've worked with this bidder before. They may be more versed in installing the plastic pipe versus the concrete. It gets some more efficiency.
Thank you.
I believe there were, just for full disclosure for the board, there were other parts of this project where we offered alternate bids. But after our review, looking at the numbers, looking at the actual work that was to be done, we did not accept any other alternates except for that one.
That's correct.
Do full-time superintendent figure for this?
Yeah, we will. He actually lives in, he's gonna live in Crystal Lake. He'd be a local superintendent. He's a small guy. He's about 6'3", 280 pounds.
Of these bids that we gave, are any of them the same from the last project that we used? Or, I mean, I know there's new things like excavation that we haven't done for a while, but are they like, have we ever used them?
So the only bidder, to the best of my memory, that would be the same as Nelson Fire Protection. They would have been a sub to General Trades last time.
Peter was
And the painter's the same contractor, yeah, DES painting, so. Those are the two. The rest, we had a pretty competitive field across the board, like they're saying. And the one thing to look at are the numbers, obviously, but you look for the spread on the numbers. And aside from a few outliers and people who made a mistake, the bids were within 3 to 5% of each other, up and down. And what that tells us is that the bidders all saw the same project, which is good. So there's a high reliance on the numbers when we're doing scope review, as opposed to if you had a low bid of X and the next bidder was like 20% below, and next bidder was 15% that bidder. That means 3 people saw 3 different jobs, and it's much harder to certify that the contractors understand the scope of the work.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Glassing and glazing doesn't include any custom interior storefronts again, does it?
No, there's no, please.
I mean, stick built, are the windows prefab, or are they aluminum frame, stick built?
They're gonna come as a unit, so we're gonna, that was a subject of discussion during the bid, and so, but what we determined, we did go to alternate manufacturers, we looked at those and so forth, but we couldn't get a significant swing in the lead time. And so there wasn't an enticement really to go to other than a specified bidder. And there are, of course, reasons you want to stay with a specified bidder, mostly because that is what White is recommending. But also that manufacturer has more of a reputational stake on the job than because they were specified.
Okay, seeing no more questions, I'm gonna ask for a roll call vote, please.
David Costa,
Yes.
Stephanie House. Yes. Keith Sebastian,
Yes.
Josie Chetta. Yes. Gwen Violet. Yes. Barclay Butler.
Yes.
Charlie Shaw.
Yes,
Motion carried.
thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna shoot take this presentation, no offense to me.
move on up the evening.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I guess now we're going to move on to our discussion regarding phase 2.
So with us this evening, Stuart Brodsky, who we've met on multiple occasions. He has with him tonight Steve Shearer, who's one of the other outstanding minds at White and Company. I've seen Steve on multiple calls this year, met him a couple times in person, and the two of them tonight are going to tag team a presentation to talk about phase 2. Last week in our regular board meeting, I did pose a couple of questions to the board, something to think about. So tonight, the folks from White and Company are going to give you more to think about, and there are some pivotal discussions that the board needs to engage in so that we can move forward with some sort of plan on the next particular phase. So that might turn it over to Steve and Stuart.
Okay, thanks. John, we'll just kind of
Steve, you gotta get a little closer to you to pick it up. Yeah.
all right, good. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Okay, we're looking at a site plan, and we're calling this, so we're gonna, in addition to showing you phase 2, we're gonna show you the end result when all the phases are complete. And as you may recall, we've kind of made presentations with either 4 or 5 total phases. Phase 2 is the next step in this overall process, but it's very important when we do phase 2 that it fits in the context of everything we're going to do to the end game that gets you to your finished project down the road in phase 5. So this is a site plan when everything is complete from a site plan standpoint. Pictured in white is the existing building and the portions of it that would remain. This ochre color is denoting new construction. And you can see down at the bottom, that's phase 1. That's the project we just approved. And it sits at the south end of the junior high wing. Phase 2 consists of an addition that extends and connects to a couple, 3 places on the existing building. We'll talk in a moment, but we're also obviously have a demolition of a portion of the north wing or all of the north wing. We'll show you a couple options related to that. When we get to phase 3, which is beyond the current project that we're starting schematic design on, the project envisions a new main entrance to the school at this location. And with that, one of the things that's obviously driving that is bringing the access from Bellevue Road, which would consist of a road that extends to the main entrance. It brings a new parking lot and a new area where we can essentially service the bus fleet and park the bus fleet. So those are the 2 major contributors to that. Some other things that you will see on here that we have thought about. It's a pretty large site, but there's lots of things that need to be thought about as we move forward with the site, so we put everything in the right place. One of which is stormwater retention. So we have a natural retention area to the northeast. That happens to be one of the low points on the site. So water naturally goes there and that will be developed. We're simply putting a halo around an area. We're not saying that entire area will be dug out or modified to that extent, but simply that's the place that you will see that be developed. Another component is, in a moment, we're going to show you a diagram of different kinds of mechanical systems for the building. One of the options to be considered is called geothermal, which consists of, instead of refrigerant piping circulating only through the mechanical equipment, the fluid circulates through essentially wells or tubes that go down anywhere from 200 to 400 feet in the ground and releases heat or absorbs heat to service the heat pumps that would be within the building. It's an extraordinarily energy efficient system used for many, many school projects. We want to make sure when we plan this whole site, we put this road in, we put this parking in, that you have area left over that well field can be put in. And because that well field would go in with most of the new construction, most of which is in phase 2, We wanted to make sure that location was appropriately organized on the site. You also know that you have playgrounds that will be displaced by the new addition. So we're planning a new zone for playgrounds. As we get into phase 2, we'll design those more specifically, what types, whether it's hard surface or raised play equipment, whether it's wood chips or rubberized surface, all these details are yet to come. And we're also organizing an area on the site to extend the existing septic field. Existing septic field is kind of an L-shaped septic field that sits in this area. And because of the sequence of all the construction, it gets disturbed. At least the north end of it gets disturbed as we go, but we need to extend it and make it bigger because the building footprint is getting bigger. So we've worked with kind of evaluating the topography of the site, the configuration of the existing system, and this shape will be the most advantageous for the expansion of that second field. We also want to take into consideration where outdoor athletic play areas could go. The septic field will disrupt the location of the existing track. So we're looking for a future location that would be adjacent to parking, easy access, convenient to the school. And when you put a new track in, it gives us an opportunity to develop the center area of that, of where the track would go as a green field to play soccer and other athletic sports on the site. We know that the food program, gardens, other things like that have been important to the school. And so we're denoting an area on the site adjacent to the junior high. So within easy access, say, of the FACS lab, both a raised greenhouse structure as well as gardens. So those gardens there's other places on the site too that you could develop community gardens, but the opportunity to integrate that into your curriculum, you have the property, you have the opportunity. So we wanted to make sure that that was also thought out educationally and physically so that it circulated and was located in the right place. A couple other things to point out. You see these little squares on the site. We've located the opportunity for outdoor classrooms. One of them is incorporated in the phase 1 addition right now. If anything we've learned from COVID, the ability for students to go outside to get fresh air, to have mask breaks, and also to be connected to the outdoors and nature is important. And so this outdoor classroom is actually integrated into the design of the phase 1 project. We'll show you that in a moment. And then a couple things about school entrance that we'll show you in a moment on the phase 2, because it's different than your final phase. But so your main school entrance will be located here, and then the district offices will move to what is currently the school entrance, and then we will repurpose some of the space in the building. Steve can talk about that just in a moment. And I think I've kind of covered everything on the final site plan. As all of you may remember, also part of this is in deference to the potential for Route 176 to expand and widen, so it allows that to happen, sets the building back better than it was, and provides some relief, and also eliminates a significant portion of your daily traffic from Route 176 from school activities. Oh yes, okay, really interesting and important thing. There's enough site and an opportunity to consider the idea of photovoltaic array, ground mounted or building mounted, meaning roof. But since you have a site area, there's an interesting opportunity. So in contemporary design of schools, or really any building, as we're looking to the future, we're trying to future-proof, select mechanical systems, any energy using system in the building that's going to put you in the best position in the future to move eventually toward a more carbon neutral world. And so the mechanical systems in the building will be designed to use the least possible energy, but it's impossible to create a mechanical system today that doesn't use any energy. So as the grid, the electrical grid becomes greener over time, whether that's 20 years or 50 years, I think it's gonna happen sooner than we think in Illinois. Other states are ahead of us. The idea of tying that photovoltaic array and scaling it so that it provides the electrical energy to offset the energy needed to heat and cool the building and operate the building, lights, things like that. So we did some broad brush calculations of approximate site area for an offset PV array. There are numerous ways to purchase photovoltaic arrays, whether they're lease backs, whether they're direct purchase, whether they're granted. That's something you don't have to decide today, but it's something that we wanted to make sure there was an appropriate place on the site. Good news is it's right next to the neighbor that you'll never hear from, which is the ComEd easement. And so it's a really good location. Your neighbors will not see anything that would be mounted on the ground, and provides for kind of a neutral impact from a community standpoint. All right, so come closer to the time in this project. This is the phase 2 site plan. So some of the differences you're going to see here is that we don't yet have our Valley View Road access. That's probably the major difference. And we do not have the phase 3 addition, which is the new main entrance to the school. So the school entry will remain where it is now. The main office will be in that location. The district offices will remain where they are. And one of the improvements is, since we're building in your preschool, your kindergarten and your junior kindergarten, pre-kindergarten classes in this, there happens to be a very convenient way to bring an access point in where you currently have a paved area, so that you actually have a preschool entry into the school. And we'll be able to accomplish that in concert with phase 2. School playgrounds will have to be relocated as a part of this phase because of all the work that's happening. You can kind of see the shadow of some of those areas underneath this diagram. We will have to build in place the retention that's scaled for the whole project, so that it's ready to go, because the majority of the new construction is really happening in phase 2, or the majority of the area that doesn't absorb water on the ground. The potential for relocating the track and the soccer field, and the extension of the septic field. So those are the major components of the phase 2 site plan as you will see it. You'll notice that we hope to continue to incorporate opportunities for outdoor learning as we develop this project. There will be a courtyard that is in between the early childhood and the building adjacent to the library. So we have an opportunity to put an early childhood play area and other outdoor learning opportunities within that courtyard. It's a controlled area, developed area, it's secure. So it's really a great opportunity. By having this space, it allows us to continue to bring natural light into the school. Steve will probably, when he shows you the massing and the planning, you'll notice that the education spaces are oriented essentially north-south. And those are that's the optimal massing we want for daylighting. We're bringing daylight into classrooms. You can control south light, and north light is abundant and beneficial to the learning environment. So those are the major features of phase 2 site plan. Are there any questions before we kind of get into the detail? Okay.
Yeah, this is
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So just a question about that designated PV area, which I think
Yes.
is part of phase 3. Is it phase 3 or phase 2? Phase 3.
It could be, truth be told, is it could be done honestly in conjunction with phase 2 or any phase thereafter. So as we're designing phase 2, we're going to keep that in mind in relation to how the switchboard and other aspects of the roofing and the site and everything in the building is designed so that we don't do anything that prevents that from happening in
Right.
the future. Yeah.
And is that a supplemental source of power, or is there to provide backup or rollover power in the event of an outage?
So there's different levels of backup power, and so one of them is emergency lighting, and often emergency lighting is on backpack. I'm looking, our battery pack, and I'm looking in here, and I don't see any battery packs in here. I think there might be fixtures on the emergency circuit. So it either
That's
could be,
right. We have, in the junior high, we have a gas powered generator.
that's right.
That when the electricity goes off, that generator kicks on, runs emergency lights in the hallways here in the gymnasium, and that's about it.
Right. So with what happened in the fall, we kind of lost, power in the kitchen, which affected things. This would alleviate that type of scenario.
So what the interesting thing about photovoltaics is they provide power when the sun is shining, and then the way it would work as a backup is if you had battery storage. So you have to store it. If you're going to use that energy beyond a day-lit situation, you have to store it. But if the power went out in your community during the day, when there's daylight, you would have power.
Okay.
So those are some details we could get into, but yeah, backup power could be through, power generation with either diesel, propane, natural gas, different sources like that. Less desirable, but the photovoltaic array can be utilized for that purpose.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
It might be a more relatively basic question, but could you point out for whether it's phase 2 or even on phase 3, where's going to be kind of designated entrance for construction vehicles and personnel? Is that coming through the parking lot?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And so I'm actually going to use this aerial. My understanding is that we're going to bring construction access around the west side of the building. There will be, and this obviously would be, Terry would speak to this, but a stone path, temporary stone path that will come around the building and come to the point of construction. And our goal is to locate that path so that it can become kind of part of this, the new gravel path in the future.
Will we have possession of the other property, farm property? By this point,
Possession, we already have
will they have vacated it?
as far as the farmland.
Yes.
So during phase 1, which we're going into the summer, we are not going through that farm, so they will be farming it this year. Actually, Stuart, if you could go to that phase, where you have the outdoor gardens area on this particular image, that right there, that is designed to be where we bring in a stone temporary parking area for folks who are working in the construction site to park, so that they're not in the staff and parent parking lot. And that is an access road around the western edge of the junior high. It's paved, blacktop for a certain area, and then it does become gravel, and that will be the access area. Okay. So cars will be coming in there and parking. What that shows is outdoor gardens will be a temporary parking lot.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
I know this is a technicality, but like over the summer, they have the Junior Wolves program, right? Don't they have football going on the fields and everything? And if they're doing construction, will that still, I don't know when it's in the fall, June, summer, different activities happen on those fields over there.
So in the summertime, we do get the occasional team that does come out and practice on our field. They would be impacted by not having access to that area. And then in the fall, when the junior world start, usually we're in school, and we should have this project done by then. So we're anticipating it will be used.
Okay, we're gonna kind of go inside the building and talk about the development of the plant.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. So we wanted to walk you through sort of the stage plan for the phase 2 additions and how things are organized in the building. for this given phase. Primarily, it's your core academic spaces. We want to make sure that there's space for core classrooms to accommodate not just your growing enrollment, but your growing programs too. So it's sort of organized in three core academic wings. The first new one would be this one here, which is predominantly your preschool and kindergarten spaces. That age group, those types of spaces makes a lot of sense to keep together. Which is dedicated entry for the preschool program. Those tend to be larger classrooms. There's very specific toileting requirements and storage requirements. So it really makes sense to locate those kind of as its own early childhood wing, and we can start to tailor that wing specific for those early learners in that age group of students. The next is kind of core classroom spaces, accounting the classroom counts we need per section. So this is just indicating 2 5-section grade levels, but with sort of that flexible collaboration spaces that's already in place at the junior high, but bringing that level of flexibility into the academic spaces for the elementary school. The other component is centralizing student service. Sorry, okay. Way ahead of me. Is centralizing student services into its own suite of spaces. So these are speech pathologists, social workers, psychologists, kind of all located in a common space of the building. Students are coming in and out for different services. So having it centrally located within the school, along the primary hallway through the school, I think is a key kind of location for those services. And the last are PE athletic spaces, and we have actually a couple options to review. This option is actually indicating that 3 PE stations be made up through this new building addition. And what this also does, it creates a link to the junior high. So the circulation around the building becomes a little bit more easier in terms of wayfinding. You don't necessarily have to cross through common spaces to get from one end of the building to the other. But it makes the flow through the building a little bit better. One thing to note with this amount of new construction that's denoted right now is that because they're adding so much square footage to the building, there is a requirement for a storm shelter in the building. In a lot of cases at schools, the one space that is apt for housing all your student population in a safe storm shelter tends to be the gymnasium. So this gymnasium will be designated as the storm shelter of the building. It just means it's constructed in a specific way to withstand a storm event. And there's some plumbing and mechanical requirements that it'll have so that you have things like running water and some natural ventilation for a certain amount of time in the event of a storm. The other component of this is this phase, what this pathway is showing is actually the removal of the north wing of the building. So a lot of the investments needed for the health and life safety requirements of that part of the building would be null and void in that case because that part of the building is being removed and those academic spaces are being made up for through the new addition of these classroom spaces. That would require what we call reskinning, but essentially kind of finishing the new exterior face of the building. Once that building comes down, we would sort of reskin and provide a new exterior wall to that portion of the building. So I mentioned an option with in terms of the PE stations. This is denoting 3 PE stations accommodated through the new construction. The other is actually keeping the elementary school gym. It would have to be recladded just due to some of the building condition assessments of the exterior wall, but the space itself could be kept, and we would just kind of, again, reskin around the gym. But what that would allow you to do is keep that as a gym, reskin it, and then the amount of new construction we need for the PE station would just be smaller. You would have one less PE station built into that new addition.
Steve, question for you on that.
Sure.
In this particular option, is the size of the addition still require a storm shelter?
We would have to double check that square footage. It gets close when we start to look at the gym space. And we'd have to double check whether or not going from 3-section gym to 2.
So the follow-up question to that, if we went from a 3 gym down to a 2, and the 2 gym station was the storm shelter, is that space large enough to house the student population if there's a storm during the day?
Yeah,
Thank you.
the square foot per student is very high. It's shelter in place. Students are, laying back on our laps and they're in their tight and they're sheltered in place.
Yeah, and then accordingly, it would bring down the cost of that storm shelter because the hardening of that type of structure, we wouldn't have to extend it across a larger building. So just be a little bit more cost effective in addition to potential cost savings in saving the north gym, which still requires some work. There's still some work to do there. There's some reskinning, but it would also provide an opportunity to separate that gym activity from the larger gym activity. So there are potentially some benefits in doing that as well from a school operational and educational standpoint.
That's all I was gonna ask. I was just gonna ask if there were benefits to maintaining a second gym on the elementary side.
This building a new gym help with multi-purpose room? And I ask that because before COVID was a thing, many of the things that came to a board level were related to lunch chaos and gym chaos. So I was hoping that eventually through the course of these phases, that, we adjusted some space to address those issues to help the cost. I don't know what goes on with the multi-purpose room now, other than lunch. That's why I'm asking.
From an academic standpoint, in a functionality during the day, I guess it would depend on how much renovation you put into the north gym. Do you make that a competition gym, or do you make it a gymnasium that's more like a multi-purpose room that you could also then double as cafeteria overflow because it's relatively close to the kitchen area? The new construction, the new gym areas would not be easily accessible to the cafeteria. So from an overflow standpoint from the kitchen area, keeping the north gym makes sense. But as was indicated, you will need to put some money in that location, not only to fix the outside, but also to fix the inside as a functional space.
Like, does the multi-purpose room get cleared out after lunch because it gets used for other things, or is it just not a big enough cafeteria to begin with?
We currently use that space, I won't say every moment of the day. We do have early morning band in that space because the current band room is not large enough to socially distance students. We currently on Tuesday do our shield testing in that location. It does lunch gets set up, it's broken down, it gets cleaned, and things do go back in there in the evenings depending on what activities are going on. We currently are not having any athletic practices in that location.
I have a question, just to keep my mind. So the current, our space, like what we have right now, how many students is that designed to accommodate? Right, not what we have right here.
I don't know that I've done that calculation. I do know that you did house a large number of students here in years past. We have modified spaces in the building since that time, since you had your high level of 1,000 students. I couldn't answer, I don't have an answer for you. I don't know. Also, currently we are trying to keep class sizes under 20, and that has been an area of community and district pride for a number of years now. And certainly we could put more students in the classrooms physically, but they do become very tight. As you know, the classrooms are not all the same size. There are some that are much smaller than others. capacities are not nearly as large as others. I have to do some research on that and do the math to give you the number.
Right, so, but adding this would, all of these different would allow for more students, obviously, by one section more per grade level.
Yes, if you recall this year, we are now at 5 sections in kindergarten. And we expect, we're for sure 5 in kindergarten. We expect that to continue. We have some other grade levels where we could go to 5 sections now because we're over the 20 students per section. The plan that White has drawn up here is showing for 5 strands at every grade level. So that does give us some room for growth that we are currently experiencing, and for the ones that we are expecting from the subdivisions that are currently being in discussion with the Village of Prairie Grove to be built, as well as the one that's currently actively being built at the corner of 176 and 31. That was our plan to make sure we accommodated not just the students that we have now, which is 788, but also for the future growth.
So like with the cafeteria that we have now, like if we didn't do that gym turn into an overflow cafeteria, I mean, how many, like, I'm just, we're adding sections or rooms for more sections to have more capacity of students. So just making sure, like, is the cafeteria gonna be big enough for the students that we, like, how many other sections we run through a cafeteria? It's not by grade. We have multiple grades, and then the junior high, I mean, are those, I guess those spaces are those spaces, but are we having enough space for the difference, the growth?
So I'm going to answer that question this way. Under the current COVID mitigations, that space is not adequate. Once those go away or are reduced, yes, we believe that those gyms, those cafeteria spaces, the junior high cafeteria, the triangular shape by the gym, and the multi-purpose room are adequate to house our students for lunch, assuming we're back sitting at the normal tables as we have been in the past. Now, will we need to add a 4th lunch period? Sure, that's always a possibility. And we would make that accommodation in our daily schedule if need be.
So you're saying you would recommend keeping that the elementary gym?
I'm not making that recommendation to you tonight. We're giving it to you as an option to consider because that is a viable space. It also, there is some benefit to it for overflow, for the lunch area. It also would save the district some money as opposed to building a 3-station multi-purpose room gym combination. Now, it's not going to save millions and billions and billions of dollars, but it would save some money because you're not tearing down, just rehabbing the current space.
It's already spaces laid out that, as Steve pointed out, clearly schools were under no way prepared for COVID and the need for space, but it's space that needed to be repurposed in the future, and it's conveniently located close to the cafeteria in an easily accessible area.
That is correct. I guess I'll also answer the question this way is absolutely when we're done with the presentation and discussion tonight, I will give you my recommendation. But let's have some more discussion first.
Some other nuances about the plan. Some of the new construction just requires some of the much needed mechanical space so we could get these new areas of the building online without disrupting parts of the building that are under construction. So currently there's a lot of mechanical space here. We're actually looking to make a link. This will allow us to kind of build those systems, get that infrastructure in place, and then kind of come through with the actual hallway connection. As Stuart mentioned, this is when this courtyard becomes enclosed, so it's actually a fully secured courtyard with buildings on all 4 sides. That makes it apt for extension of the library, or as Stuart noted, outdoor play-based activities are specific to that age group of kindergarten and pre-K. They tend to have a little bit more different needs in terms of what they engage in the outdoors, separate from what would be like an elementary kind of level playground, but the idea is it's completely secured outdoor space, along with opportunities for outdoor learning, even for the elementary grade levels too. So this is looking at the snapshot of phase 2 completed, and just for the sake of discussion, we're showing the option where gym still remains, but essentially that would require moving back into these spaces, just kind of making sure that we have the right number of classrooms allocated, that there's a home for art. But other than what's needed to be done in terms of reskinning this facade, this is really just classrooms moving in where other grade levels used to be, sort of an exercise in reshuffling. Because what isn't included in this academic wing, as we plan for in later phases, are these kind of flexible collaboration spaces like that.
Maybe one other comment, in addition to the collaboration areas, of course, student services, health suite and all that, the needs for that have grown or are maybe a little bit more substantial than you might have had in the past. So this plan takes into account the ability to accommodate that both in a configuration that's most desirable academically, so getting the right spaces decentralized within each age-appropriate wing, and then getting some of the services more centralized because they serve both junior high and elementary school. So there's a great opportunity here to really hone those elements that are really important to your academic development.
It's the little dotted line section of the square in the, where's the bottom line?
That indicates the septic tank that's currently out there, so it's really pump service and septic field.
Want me to speak to this? Okay, so this diagram, it's somewhat self-explanatory. You can see the key on the upper right, and the zones of the building are shaded with tones relative to the type of systems that exist right now and or are being proposed. So the light green area is a combination of the current unit ventilators, which are, you have some hot water, there's cooling with a system called VRF. It's a combination hybrid system. The North Gym itself, we most likely get a mechanical replacement upgrade as a part of that renovation. The central area of the building shaded in blue is served by air handling units, some of which have been addressed in the previous construction. The junior high wing, as you know, done lots of work with multi-zone unit replacement over the last couple of years. The new phase 1 addition will have a system that is very, very simple. It is the same, just sized appropriately for that wing. So that leaves us with a new construction of exploring 2 very energy efficient systems, geothermal and VRF. VRF stands for variable refrigerant flow. And it's not a completely uniform system, as we need to bring fresh air in, so we'll have some other components to it. Geothermal the same way. It consists of utilizing ground source piping and ground source heat pumps distributed throughout the building. One of the reasons this decision, in addition to that gym decision that we talked about a moment ago, is so important is that each of these systems have requirements for housing the equipment that distributes air within the building. So, for example, with geothermal, it's a little bit more distributed. We end up putting what are called individual heat pumps closer to the spaces that they're serving, and then utilizing a dedicated air capturing system in a more centralized way. So to move forward in schematic design, we want to take into account the location of those. We typically put them in closets so that they're sound isolated in the classroom, but maybe in between those spaces. So for example, we're not currently showing those spaces in this diagram. VRF is a little bit more flexible in that it can utilize primarily rooftop equipment along with the piping and the individual cassettes that go with So so a couple options. They're both very, very energy efficient. They'll work well with moving toward, potential incorporating photovoltaic arrays and really getting toward a very low energy use intensity for the building, and provide for a good future flexibility for the building. So that's
You ask, what's the, are you asking the question, you're explaining the options, or you're telling us what option you want?
Yeah, and we realize that making a decision on geothermal versus VRF would be very difficult for you to make tonight because we have to, there'll be some, cost investigation with that. There will be some energy use intensity. So in other words, how much energy do they consume and how efficient are they? But we will need to get to that level of resolution reasonably quickly, but we want to get this important decision on the table. So if you were in a position to make a decision like that tonight, that would be great. We understand that this is, that part of it's a work in progress.
Well, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one that understood everything you just said, so I just want to talk about it, because traditional rooftop units, you have to run ductwork, so your ceiling height changes, right?
Right.
Your heat pumps, where would you put the heat pumps?
So, so you do have, so for example, with the geothermal system, you will still have ductwork in the building, distributing to the individual heat pumps in each classroom, but just the ductwork will be a lot smaller. Because it's
Piping,
not,
though, right? It's, the geothermal is just feeding the heat pumps with the water.
it'll bring, typically there's a system that brings fresh air in, and it looks a little bit like a rooftop unit, or it can be in a room in the building. It
It's just
pre-cools.
not being fed with boilers and stuff, it's coming from outside.
I'm sorry.
Just the water's not being fed from a boiler, it's coming from a pipe in the ground.
That's
You're
right.
You're still gathering air and circulating it.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there could be, I think what you're getting at is, there's some differences in, say, how much space do you need above the ceiling and to the roof deck and for the structure and all that. And those are, there's an advantage potentially with geothermal VRF compared to a standard air delivery, which requires more depth because you're moving a lot more air volume in those types of systems.
Because we did the VRF and on the last edition, because we didn't have ductwork in the ceiling, it was easier to run piping through the ceiling.
That's correct. Yep.
And then if you were to do it, because obviously we only did it in classrooms, is that normal, or would you still condition the hallways?
In a new building, so I'm not a mechanical engineer, and so I can't speak to it in a lot of detail. But with older unit ventilators, often the corridors were not conditioned and relying on essentially relief air through the door vents, louvers that you see in the door. You probably see them in the building. In a newer building, we probably would condition the corridors, more active conditioning, so that we can control it. And as you know, learning environment is extending into those corridors, particularly in the phase 1 addition. So that we need to treat those like learning areas, like extensions of the learning environment.
So, sorry again, why not just plan this with rooftop units like we do traditionally, like over here and stuff?
You could, these two systems will be much more energy efficient. So that's the component that we're exploring, is that before you spend money on photovoltaic panels, get your mechanical system to the best possible outcome you can long term, because you'll spend the least amount of money. Those systems also rely on fossil fuels. So as the future moves toward electrification based on a power grid that becomes cleaner, it positions you, it future-proofs your systems into the future.
Have you done geothermal in schools in this area?
Yes.
Often, I'm very dated on my knowledge of that. It seems like it was a thing years ago when LEED got popular, but in the non-school market, I've never seen it. I've heard a couple horror stories and never saw. I haven't seen it in 10 years. But but I don't do schoolwork, so.
Yeah, we're doing some work in that District 205 work is Jacob, Stevenson High School, as well as Geothermal First 205. I believe they have some, or that's VRF. That's VRF. So the point being, we're actively utilizing both geothermal and VRF systems in schools. In my, obviously, previous firm, I did a lot of geothermal work in schools.
And do you remember approximately what the buyback was on that? I thought it was a couple, I thought it was a lot. 20 years.
It can vary quite a bit. We'll, of course, explore if there are any grant opportunities that help with that. So that is a part of that conversation about return on, so that gets into a return on investment conversation and payback. And we also know that that's within the window of your bond program, so that you're obviously getting to that point. There's also a perspective about reducing carbon, which carbon's carbon, so regardless of what it costs, moving toward a more carbon neutral direction in the future is something we're seeing as a value proposition and just a environmental stewardship position that school districts will take and are taking across the country.
Is there a difference relative to the peak maintenance service of a geothermal or energy efficient versus traditional roof unit?
Yeah, so any type of mechanical system, there are many things you consider. One is maintenance, one is energy efficiency, and the other is, payback over time. So all those things are, and that ease of operation or complexity of operation. So all of those are factors that we can come back with, basically a comparison of, whether it's kind of a stoplight chart, high, medium, low, so that you'd have that information as part of that consideration.
Well, you can see we just replaced all these rooftop units here. They were 20 years old. So it's about the lifespan. On the junior high, was that last summer or something, did that, right? So the junior high was built in 97, we just replaced all of those last year. So it's not that huge time before you're already replacing equipment. So my point was that obviously, this is great, we're talking about it. We have to keep in mind as we're going throughout this, that in order for any of this to be real, it has to be scaled down to a sizable level financially that can actually be done. You know what I mean? So we're not just drawing the world up there that dies and doesn't really do anything, because then it's just all a waste of everyone's time, and the district doesn't get, the resources it needs in the future. So that's why. And I know, like I said, I don't have enough info on geothermal, other than it's been a long time since I've looked at it. Sounds awesome. It's, it's the same solar discussion too. It's great. It's just the premium to do it up front might be the difference between the project being real and the project staying on paper and never getting built. So we have to keep that in mind as we're looking at the must-haves and stuff like that.
Yeah, understood.
What this option 1, option 2, is there like option 3 is what we do now, or is it?
Yeah. I think that's a point that,
Like, what the-
that Steve's making, is that, when you compare it, looking at what would be, so the units that you have in the air handling units that sit on a roof and are essentially a package unit, there are many different types, and essentially they are, the cooling is electrical. It's essentially a compressor, and the heating is through gas fire. So there's so any of those systems that are, we'll call traditional or conventional, there are many, many permutations and options. The types of units you have in the junior high wing are, they're unique. They're multi-zone. They're a very good product. The mechanical engineer likes them. They they work in a certain way. They have a lot of ductwork because they distribute air uniquely from the unit to each space. There's different characteristics of those compared to what would be a more traditional, what you call VAV system, which distributes the air and ductwork a little bit differently. So point being, a third option would be, we'll call it a traditional or conventional heating cooling system with either, typically with gas fired heating or boiler.
Ultimately, we want to try to be on one system if we could, instead of multiple. And I understand what you're saying, Steve, with regards to the geothermal.
There's just too many different building types that this building getting
Yeah.
pieced together for the last 70 years, It's constrained, so when we did, 3-4 years ago, we put at least in the.
Yeah.
We put that system in because there's no way to run ductwork in there. The junior high was built in the late 90s, it was built with conventional rooftop units, and it's probably, and then, is there any classrooms in there? With the ventilators and the windows, that's where they get their.
Yeah.
So that's why, I think it's too late for that.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like, instead of going to the geothermal stuff, we stick with the RTUs that we have, that we just got. The new ones that we just did the junior high recently, just stick with that, so at least we're kind of, I don't know if it matters.
These areas of the building are large enough that you're in a position where you could make a decision for this new work. There's enough square footage that would make sense to pick the right system for the future for this part of the building, and not feel tied to the systems you have in the past. And the truth is, we try to simplify this diagram so that it doesn't get really complex, but there's some minor differences, say, in the existing gym we're sitting in right now, the type of units that serve it versus the classroom, but so no buildings have completely monolithic mechanical systems, and they're always broken into parts because you want the equipment as close as you can possibly get it to the space you're occupying. So your ductwork is reasonable, you're not losing energy running air through ducts that are running too far or get too large.
Part of the rationale for having this high-level conversation about the mechanical systems dates back to 2017-18. We were discussing the renovation of the district learning center and the junior high library, which became the STEM lab and the FACS lab. And we had a lengthy discussion at that time about how could we have all this land, could we consider at some point in time, PV arrays to help out the building. So I recall that conversation we had prior to that renovation. Asked White & Company to see if we could include that, which is why you saw the PV array sketch on the first slide. That's why we're talking about it now. If that's a direction that the board wants to continue with this large area, that certainly, I think, could be a good return on investment over time. We're talking about a building that we expect to last for the next 75, 80 years. And I think we do see that payback over time. It's very difficult sometimes to swallow that price tag up front, knowing we're going to get the payback for it in the long haul. Again, that's a board level decision. Certainly, we did the multi-zone RTU in the 5th grade edition, the phase 1 edition, because it fits with where we attached it to. And it really wasn't a big enough area for us to consider going with, something that's going to be geothermal and things of that nature. This new area is. Certainly, if you want to stick with the conventional, traditional types, it's even just as easy for to draw out. Maybe it doesn't give us the return on investment. It's not as energy efficient. That's a decision that you're going to have to make so that we can make the appropriate plans moving forward and be able to know what we can do, what we can't do, and kind of based on this decision, mechanical and not mechanical.
Is PV array being solar? Yes. Obviously, that you see. Geothermal on the ground, you don't see. Right? I know.
Yeah, PV is our solar array panels that should be ground.
Yeah.
Or on building.
I remember last time we talked about it, we liked the solar because we also thought it would maybe tie to some curriculum.
100%, correct.
Yeah, and we would, so when it comes to solar panels, you know, the cost of doing that, the ways to finance it have really evolved particularly over the last 5 years. But we always try to emphasize, when we use them you know, working along with a mechanical system in the building, get that mechanical system operating as efficiently as possible, because if you're using panels to try to offset it, that's the kind of balance we're sort of exploring, is the energy use of the building versus the amount of panels you're providing. So you've heard the term net zero or net positive. It's the idea that you pick a portion of the building, since we're building a big new portion, we could say, offset the whole building. So there are some incremental approaches we could take to that evaluation as well.
So it's the same mindset there as far as looking at the energy efficiency of the building, like envelope? So,
Yes.
because obviously in the old sections, it's an old leaky building that probably consumes way more energy than it needs to. If we're building new, you know, everything, wall type, the glazing type, all of that helps the system not need to be turned on.
Yeah, that's a good point. The envelope and the roof. The good news is the codes, the International Energy Conservation Code has really ramped up in the last decade. The requirements are quite stringent, both for the amount and kind of insulation you put on a building, as well as you know, both the roof and the walls, as well as how airtight it is. So you might notice when the north wing is getting built, you're going to see air and vapor barrier wrapping every corner really tightly. So from the ceiling joint to the window to the top of the roof to the point where, you know, the flashing extends over it, everything is going to be is required to be sealed very tightly and very uniformly. Insulation is continuous. We're trying to avoid what's called thermal conduits, like anything metal running through the wall that would bring cold air to the cold sense into the building. A lot of really modern innovations in wall construction.
Have you seen any problems with the geothermal wall?
Um,
Here's why I'm gonna explain.
Yeah.
My neighbor, my summer-in-law, is a multi-million-dollar mansion. He had geothermal. And it froze. And it pumped water throughout his entire house, destroyed it. So that's why I'm asking, have you seen any problems with geothermal?
Yeah, so there are many different ways to create a geothermal system. And so what could potentially have happened is the power went out. And so he no longer had power to the system. So you have to have, just like you have now with a generator, you have to have a backup power solution to run the pumps in the well field, basically bringing the fluid through the building.
Consistent.
Yeah.
As long as the power is out, you have to have that system running.
Yeah, you have to, so you want that fluid moving through the building constantly. And if the power goes out, you still want those pumps working. So typically the backup power would be extended to the system that pumps that through the building.
And that backup power would be able to go, even if we lost power for a week.
Yeah, it would have to be a system. It would be a system that would operate either as a combination if you have photovoltaics or a gas, you know, a fossil fuel source, natural gas, whatever that might be. So it would allow you to run it as long as you needed to. I don't know, your power outages have been typically, you know, what durations you've experienced. That's something to.
We have three to 4
Around here
weeks.
to ask that
In
question.
August, it was several days.
So
We had one,
yeah.
3 to 4 weeks. This was
Yeah.
about 10 years ago. A long time. It was during the summer though, so the school wasn't really affected.
Yeah, no, it's definitely important in, you know, in any mechanical system or any building to make sure that your critical systems are on backup. There is a backup system.
I have two questions. One, by either choosing geothermal, VRF, or RTUs, that doesn't say we can't still have photovoltaics, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so that option's there, no matter what.
Yeah, they work either way.
Can't have one.
The PV.
Photovoltaics,
Solar.
yeah. The PV is just a.
Because, I mean, when you're trying to talk about reducing your carbon and the value proposition being environmental friendly, you can still achieve that goal by introducing the solar arrays versus hitting the geothermal.
Yes, that's correct.
The other question I have with geothermal, although I don't completely understand how it works, like I know you could drill down 200, 300, whatever, feet into the ground. Does that disturb your water table? Because I know we're very sensitive in this area about our water.
Yeah, no, it's what the term is a closed loop system. So we're not trying to use the water in the ground at all. The tubes are, they drill, they grout them, they surround them with grout all the way down. So it's a closed loop system. The refrigerant, it's the piping, the water, which does have a refrigerant constitution to it, flows through those pipes that are surrounded by concrete. So they're not connected to any groundwater source, and it doesn't disturb the groundwater sources.
And then, so you're trying to tap into the natural heat of the earth, but are there areas where like it's not doable versus doable, like, or it always works?
Yeah, no, and it's a really good question. So what typically happens when decisions made to use geothermal do what's called a conductivity test. They'll basically install a well, and then they'll run water through it for a period of time and evaluate it. And so I've yet to have a situation on projects where it was simply a no, you can't do it. It just tells you what your ground temperature is and the conductivity of the soils and the conditions that will surround the piping. So it'll basically tell you how efficient it'll be and maybe help the engineers adjust how many wells there are within a finite limit.
Those are my questions.
Yeah.
So we're having this high level discussion because, correct me if I'm wrong, because you need to know we're gonna do the geothermal and we designate an area for it. If we're not gonna do it, you need to build a pump room with boilers in it, right?
Yes.
Certain things like that that are affecting your layout.
That's correct.
And what's the, I mean, is this something that like we talk about again and maybe look at like square foot costs? Or maybe have your mechanical guy in here explain a little more detail or what do you?
How
Yeah.
soon do you need to know? I know you said like,
Well, we're sort of overlapping what we call master plan concept design and of all of it, which is what we showed you, prior to this diagram, and then schematic design, which is the first design phase for phase 2. We're going to show you in a moment kind of what things look like. So we've actually made some good progress in our schematic design phase based on what you see today. So to keep moving schematic design forward, so we can keep the project, tracking with an approximate June, July-ish completion of documents and bidding, we do need to get a direction on that in the next 2 to 4 weeks.
So I really, like, to your point, or to move from paper to reality, you kind of have to have an understanding of the magnitude of costing. I mean,
Cost, ROI, all everything.
right.
I think also in order to get to that, to get to a tighter ballpark than what we're willing to give you tonight, there still has to be, the mechanical system's gonna play a role in that, which way you wanna go with the mechanical system. It affects the size of the building. You have to add closets for the heat posts, which we currently don't show. We're gonna add square footage to your building. And all those things go into play when you're trying to estimate what the cost is going to be. I don't want to spend district's money having White Company, do drawings for a geothermal system and find out that it's so far over anyone's estimated budget that we don't talk to anybody in the community about that. just kind of, we need to know a direction so we can make that realistic cost estimate for the board. We really can't do that until we know which one of these areas you want to go down. That will help the schematic planning, that will help a lot of the thought processes on how things get laid out for phase 2 and in future phases. So I think we want to give you that information. We want to be able to tell you it's going to cost you X dollars. We really can't. Right now, the range is so big based on how you want to use mechanical systems in this particular project.
But that's still very difficult to like kind of say, I'm going to exclude geothermal, and I have no sense is that like $5 million extra, and, or is it $1 million extra? I'm excluding something without even having an order of magnitude understanding, like it's like, oh yeah, I want my whole house to be put with, stone versus let's do some cladding, different type of material. I don't have no sense of costing, and I don't need to define dollar, but like, hey, geothermal is an upfront investment of typically this much versus doing a VRF versus doing an RTU, and it's like order of magnitude that can give me a sense, but I'm not shocked for geothermal to know that this is, and I don't want to exclude it if it's, something like, hey, it's not too far off, but I'm not getting that sense. I don't know, that's just me.
To your point though, yeah, it could be incremental money, but there could be grant or funding to offset some of those costs. So the overall additional investment might not be that more. I mean, you were mentioning grants, correct?
Yeah, we have to look at what's available right now to see if that and what that premium would be.
Right. So to your point, we don't have any clue right now with the 2X, 3X, 5X.
Right, I don't know. And that's why I'm struggling with this conversation, because yeah, geothermal is, environmentally friendly, carbon footprint, but I also want to build 10 those classrooms, this gym, this, fix that, destroy that, like all of that. And I might not be able to get this passed in a referendum because I chose geothermal and I spent $10 million. I don't know.
Stuart, Steve, I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there estimators, or do we think that the estimators from ICI could give us a more generalized ballpark as far as mechanical system costs that we're discussing tonight?
Yeah, I believe they could help with that. They will probably tap some contractors to help them as well. But as a company, I do know they have experience with both geothermal and VRF systems, and obviously all of the systems we build here and any other conventional. So I think they would be pretty comfortable with helping develop some conceptual budgets for that, yes.
Thank you.
When you say VRF, are we still talking about the same units that we have over in that north wing? Every classroom gets a ceiling mounted unit. It's fed by a condenser that's outside, and but that I think here we only have cooling ones because we still have the unit ventilators in the wall, right? So we only use the VRFs for cooling. So if we put new ones in, we get cooling and heat from them.
Yeah, it would be a system that would be both heating and cooling.
So then you're feeding hot water from a boiler, and cooling would still come from.
Potentially, there's a reversibility. So in other words, the compressor technology could have some similar comparisons to a heat pump, which is reversible, can do both heating and cooling. So it's a bit of a technical thing. We'll have to, that would be a part of that chart that has the characteristics, advantages, disadvantages. So that's something along with the order of magnitudes we could put together a comparison chart with characteristics to help answer some of the questions that you're asking.
But that would still include option 3, which is continuing with the multi-zone RTUs. Like that's how I'm in my head comparing them.
Yeah, multi-zone or VAV, so some type of package rooftop equipment. Yeah.
Where I was going with it too, because I was thinking the heat, when you said closet for the heat pumps, talking about vertical heat pumps that go in a closet and be ducted out and maybe serve 2 classrooms,
Yeah.
something like that. So do the VRFs ever get serviced, the ones that we installed a few years ago?
Service, absolutely they do.
Huh?
They get service,
They do?
yes,
Are they in the classrooms doing it?
on the roof.
For the
Those
VRFs?
units,
The actual unit in the ceiling itself doesn't ever get? I
they
think
get
it's a pretty,
clean, they get clean on
okay.
a regular basis.
I was just, as we were talking, I was thinking, well, I guess the nice thing about rooftop units is you're on the roof. You're at heat pumps or VFDs or VRFs, you're like in the classroom space. Doing service.
It depends, it'll depend. We've been pretty successful with, heat pumps and organizing so that the door to the room where they go is a door that's off of a hallway, not a classroom. You can't, I mean, I can't promise you that there wouldn't be a piece of equipment that wasn't in a room, but yeah, to try to get those doors out of those rooms, yes.
We've had one unit that the computer had failed, so we did have to do work inside the room where it was located in order to correct.
I mean, for my 2 cents, if it means anything, I think we can all agree rooftop units, traditional ductwork's the cheapest way to go. Right?
Upfront cheap.
Yes.
Yeah, first cost, and there are
First
many,
cost.
and there are
The
multiple ways.
VRFs, I remember when we looked into those last time, I mean, those are pretty neat system. They weren't the cheapest, they were pretty good with flexible space, and I remember, I thought they were very low maintenance and stuff like that. And again, I'm really against the geothermal, I think the first cost is gonna blow this project out of the water when I get debt, especially because we're talking referendum to fund it. That's just my opinion. You hate to have a building with 30 rooftop units, because it's gonna just be a never-ending maintenance nightmare for the next 75 years. Every 20 years, you're gonna be replacing rooftop units, but
Not there's a lot happening, there's plenty of repair.
lots of buildings like that, though.
Yes, there are. That's one of the things that you have to plan for then, if you do that, is that every 20 years, you're gonna replace those packages.
Yeah, I think with that, honestly, with any mechanical system, there is equipment that will be replaced on a cycle. And, you think about a roof on a building, it's a 15 to 25-year cycle. Most mechanical equipment of scale is a 15 to 25-year cycle. So it's pretty normal to consider that things just have to be maintained, replaced. The better you maintain something, the longer it lasts. It's just a part of that whole building ownership approach. So should we go on and look at some more fun aspects of discussion?
So this last image is the master concept plan. So this is essentially the end game. So you can see how the discussions on phase 2 tonight fit into the bigger roadmap of the long-term planning for the building. A couple highlights is that at the end, this is where administrative functions and some additional wellness PE spaces move to the southeast side of the building, because that is when the new road, the new bus drop-off, the new parking will be all located there. This is when this academic wing will be remodeled, so that the same flexible collaboration spaces and proper outfitted art rooms and resource spaces are located appropriately. In this case, the district office actually moves to where the school main entrance is, allows us to get some technology and some more junior high functions closer to where the junior high is. And long-term planning in terms of repurposing this space for all the music spaces. So music that's currently mobile right now has dedicated teaching spaces, band room, music for both elementary and junior high. And then that also allows, there's some early discussions of capacity dining, but an expanded kitchen and serving to accommodate the growth of population as well. But this is just kind of a roadmap, final destination, so we can understand how phase 2 sort of fits into the big picture.
Where's the main entrance?
So in this case, and we'll have different views of this becomes the main entrance of the school.
And then the last picture.
So this is the end of phase 2.
Yeah, at the end of phase 2, the main entrance for the building was not changed. The main entrance is going to be up there at the instructional office, correct? We don't flip the entrance to the building until phase 3, 4, 5 are completed. We have the road in from Valley.
So phase 2 is still with the road being in the front and no.
That is correct. Yes.
So as we thought about phase 1, as we continue to think about additions to the building and the long-term planning, we want to make sure we're consistent in terms of material selection for the outside of the building. And so these are just some ideas that we used in phase 1 that we want to continue to explore if we think about more additions to the building. But trying to think about these additions being contextual to your site. So picking up on some of the patterns of this is what, a rear school property that you currently have farmland on. Obviously, the prairies and groves of what the town is named after. Even thinking about the history of Crystal Lake and Prairie Grove and the terracotta industry, that was a big part of it. We thought the idea of using brick is a good way of not only complementing the existing building, but using a fire-baked clay material, which is essentially what brick is. It's just a nice way of tying into the history of some of the industry in the area. But warm, natural tones, if you think about some of your most recent work in the library, just introducing wood to warm things up, is just sort of things we're thinking about. And you'll see some moments where maybe there's some appropriate areas to introduce color to the outside of the building, specifically for maybe your early learners. So these are our concept renderings for phase 1. So it sounds, as Terry reported, you just had a successful bid. So this is the classroom edition that will be online this year, which is exciting. But here you get to see just the articulation of just using brick, real simple kind of striated vertical pattern, just a way of kind of making a callback to some of the patterns inherent in farmland and prairie grasses. It's also a great way of providing some solar shading on the windows, so you're getting some shading, but you're allowing a lot of natural daylight into the classrooms. And then this lower right, we talk about outdoor learning. That is a dedicated outdoor classroom, which is adjacent to some collaboration spaces for the junior high, which will be part of that phase 1 this year. And this is inside the phase 1 edition. These are spaces that will be online come the start of school. But you see it's a mixture of core academic spaces, classrooms, all with storage and technology that we've worked with Dr. Butte over the past several months with faculty and staff on right sizing and right fitting the technology in those spaces. Furniture is ongoing right now, so that we have that ordered in place. So you have the core academic spaces, but also these highly flexible collaborative spaces that we've intentionally made that are either more based on group work for students. Some of them are a little bit more intentional with technology, where students can be presenting or sharing work with one another directly outside, adjacent to the classrooms, and making sure that we have the right amount of supervision from the classrooms to those collaboration spaces. So exciting spaces that we had a successful bid. Congrats. Exciting to know these will be online this year.
Speaking point of the board, just so the board sees in these pictures, we're also repeating some of the same materials that we used in the library renovation, bathroom renovation, with the LVT flooring is the same, the carpet inlays that you see in the collaboration areas are the same, similar carpets that we're using now, so we can have a tie-in from what we've already done, moving forward to the new phases. And if we move forward into phase 2 and phase 3, you'll see some of the same similar designs and concepts in those new areas as well, so that when you're all done with it, everything's tied
This is sort of a bird's eye view of your final campus, again, based off the complete master plan concept. But we're kind of on the southeast corner of the site, and we're looking northwest in this case. So you see the new front entrance of the school, a separate bus drop-off that's actually separate from any visitor car drop-off that arrives into the front plaza, and then having a dedicated preschool drop-off. It's also quickly accessible from the car drop-off. We see gym spaces, the new administrative area, and then these classroom wings. Stuart mentioned earlier, are east-west oriented, so that we have the favorable windows to the north of the classroom or to the south of the classroom. And then this is the phase one that will start construction soon. This next view, we're going to be standing right about where my laser pointer is, looking back at what could be the front entrance of the building. So this is much later than phase two. This is phase 3 or 4 when that new administrative wing entrance is there, the bus drop off is there. But you can start to see the tie-in from some of the language that's being introduced in phase 1 that we're continuing into the subsequent phases. But this is sort of the classroom language where we have a lot of what we call ribbon windows. We get a lot of natural light into the classrooms. This is the administrative bar, just some early thinking of perhaps some graphic opportunities, much like the library had right now, where there's some tree trunk inspired imagery. In this case, we're thinking about it. Something kind of special, unique. There's a new image for the building on the glass of the admin. And then beyond is a taller volume that is the gym space. That's a storage shelter. So putting the admin up here helps kind of break down the scale of the building. So your front door to the building isn't in a 30-foot tall gym. But you have some lower volume spaces just to help break up the scale of the building. And then the next view is we're sort of on that vehicular turnaround, but thinking about the early, what we've been referring to as early childhood, but it's your kindergarten and preschool wing. And introducing some of the same aesthetic of kind of having the vertical in the front of the windows, but also introducing color out outside the building, knowing that this is the one area of the building for those early learners, making it feel like it's a child-centric kind of portion of the building. They'll have their dedicated entrance here. I think we're allocating those first 3 immediate classrooms as a preschool classroom, so they don't have to travel too far into the building. And here we're even thinking about the window heights and making sure that those are scaled appropriately for those age groups. This is an element that's a little more of an identity piece for those students, saying this is my wing of the building.
Steve, can you touch on why there's an angle for the side? The elevation at one end is higher than the other.
Yes, thanks. So just given the age group of these students here, we wanted to pay a little bit more attention to the scale of the building, so they're not just walking into a really large monotonous classroom wing. There's just our way of kind of breaking down the scale of the building. So each of those pitched roofs is actually a classroom module. So students can identify they're in the green classroom, the blue classroom. It's sloped. It's a little bit more of a residential roof. Most of the houses that these students are coming from have some kind of sloped roof to them. So it's just a way of sort of breaking down the scale of each of these classrooms, thinking about the perspective of a preschooler or a kindergarten student. And then the last is actually from inside the courtyard that gets formed by phase 2, looking at some of the outdoor classrooms. Again, reminiscent of the rendering you saw for phase 1, but continuing that same language. This being concept, what's missing here is the articulation of really what could be the playscape for the EC. Right now, it's kind of all rendered as grass, but we would think of this as a very intentional courtyard that not just has outdoor learning, but also play spaces for the preschoolers and kindergarten students. That's our last sort of conceptual image.
Would you like the overview, please? Plan through the site.
Michelle, any question?
Well, it's just, I mean, like, I don't know, this is probably way ahead, I don't know if it's possible, like, the idea that, okay, you know, obviously we don't have the money, so we'd have to go to a referendum. But if there was another option to do this in more phases, like, I know if we went even back two more before the shift in the flood and the bottom wasn't, yeah, something like that. Is there a way to think of that? The removal of the top, that portion, and then this portion? To
So-
even think of it more
Yeah.
phased?
So let's address that. So the north wing currently houses the elementary gym and 11 classrooms. That is the area that has to be either taken down, but you can only do that if you build new classrooms, or it has to be renovated based on the health, life, safety amendment that we currently have. If you do not gain any additional classrooms if you renovate, in fact, you'll probably lose classroom spaces if you renovate the north wing. If you recall, there's only one restroom in that entire area. By one, I mean one toilet space. There's one. That's not acceptable. We definitely need more than that. Right now, the students, in order to go, you know, to be sent out, they either go one at a time, or you have to send them down to different parts of the building to use their facilities. Those are the classrooms that are smaller than the rest of the building. And they were renovated over the years. You know, back when it was constructed in the late 50s, early 60s, class was different. You know, here we are 60 years down the road, things have changed, and those spaces aren't nearly as not as quality of learning spaces as we have in other parts of the building. So if you keep them and renovate them, again, you have 11 spaces. Your phase two currently has about 20 spaces, looking at maybe 20, maybe 22, which would be more than adequate to replace the 11 and provide room for growth. If you do something different, if you only did, you know, like the ECE kindergarten classroom, you know, as a smaller phase two, you'd have to keep the north wing and make big modifications to it because you don't create enough classrooms to move out. If you do the bottom part with the gym, again, you don't create enough classrooms to move out of the north wing. You only create enough classrooms to move out if you do a combination of two different areas here or make the plan different. I am in favor of keeping the gym from the north wing. This is my preferred perspective of the school, is keeping that north gym and rehabbing it and only building a two gym in the new phase. One, it's more cost effective. The hardened storm shelter space is smaller, and that is quite an exorbitant expense to build that requires storm shelter for 3 gyms. I prefer to stay to the 2. And then if you keep those 2, keep the north gym, it still gives you 3 PE spaces. When you get to phase 5, and you turn the junior high gym we're in now into the band room, choir space, practice area, rehearsal areas, you still have 3 PE spaces, which is more than the 2 we have now. So you can certainly keep the north wing. You will be putting good money into that part of the building, and not necessarily gaining the extra space that you are looking for. I think it would be a challenge to do a smaller portion and do it in multiple phases. I think that's going to be a bigger challenge.
I always need a lesson in referendums, because I was gonna ask the opposite question. Is it better to rip the Band-Aid off in a referendum and do a big project versus doing smaller projects?
Well, in order to, we're going to have to engage our community in some discussions about that topic. As I mentioned in a previous meeting, you only get a couple times per year where you can put a question on the ballot and ask the voters for that. We have 2 elections this year. Your time frame for putting a question on the ballot this summer is getting short. which doesn't give you a lot of time to engage the community and get the sense of what the folks in the community would be willing to approve. Certainly that the election in November gives you more time, but it also pushes things back, but it does give Wyoming County more time to develop plans. It gives us a greater opportunity to look with a better budget. That may be the better way to go. Wait until the November election if you're going to put something on the ballot. If you want to go down that path, we certainly have resources available to us that can help us with the community engagement piece of trying to get a referendum passed, because there is, it's a necessary thing to do. You can't just put something out on the ballot and expect it to pass unless you engage your citizens, and there's going to be some people that are going to be in favor, some are going to be opposed, and some are going to be indifferent and not know. And those are the ones that you have to educate and try to get on your side in order to get a referendum passed. They're the ones in the middle that are indifferent. The yeses are going to be yeses, and the noes are going to be noes. You're not going to change that most likely. It's thicker in the middle. So if that's the path that you want to go down, we would need to start, a series of engagement activities. We have the resources that can help us with that.
But correct me if I'm wrong, we put something on the ballot this summer. And it was a big project that we're prepared on the side to break it into phases. If it fails, we can go back and put it on November in a smaller package, right?
You certainly could.
And then after that November, then we're waiting for the next year, which.
Yeah, wait to the next election, correct, next cycle. That's why I think it's probably the wisest choice would be to have these conversations with our Prairie community and find out up front how much of a package they're willing to support before you put that on the ballot.
So that would mean between now and for November.
You still have time to put one on for the summer, but your time's getting short.
But how realistic is that to have drawings that are not too schematic? So the pricing, we can price them accurately and speak accurately to the community before it hits a ballot, along with the CA that you're going to be doing for this, for phase one. That's a tall task, right? I mean, that's a lot.
To answer the question, we have the team in place working on the project to simultaneously do construction administration for phase one, continue to develop phase two and complete the documents at this point, probably in June-ish, July. We have to kind of look at that end date and get it out to bid. If, get it out to bid so you have that final price, which would kind of align with either the June or the November referendum. So, long way of answering. Yeah, we have the resources in place to work on the documents, get it done so that it's as close to shovel ready in time with the referendum.
Other questions or thoughts from board members? I know it's a lot to take in one setting, and I appreciate Steve and Stuart your time this evening. I saw this earlier today, and I still learned some more things tonight than what we talked about earlier today. I appreciate that. And I'm sure board members have many things going through their minds right now. If you want to, we can certainly have another conversation about this. As I think Stuart said, he needs some of these answers within the next month, 2 weeks to 4 weeks, especially if you're going to try to have some sort of plan in place so we can get a really good estimate by the summer. We need some things decided. Again, I recommended this particular layout, keeping the north gym and going to 2 gyms. That helps inform some of their planning. The other part would be the mechanical system. So if you have a preference, is it one over the other? I heard some variety of discussions tonight about the potential long-term cost, even though it's cheaper in front, there's a long-term cost of traditional rooftop units, the way we have them currently constituted. And there's a higher upfront cost most likely for the geothermal system, but maybe that's a long-term better solution for the district and the community. That's a question that I'm not prepared to answer tonight. But those are some things that we need to think about and give some due diligence to and give them a response so they can adequately plan for which scenario we like the best.
So with the mechanical though, it's kind of back in your guys' ballpark right now because we asked for like an option 1, 2, 3, kind of the ballpark figure. So that gives us a couple weeks before we hear back to be able to kind of process, to make the next decision. Like, so there is no, I mean, that's what we need to be able to think about that, to be able to then move forward.
What I heard the board say collectively was that we want pros and cons in order of magnitude for each of the potential options, the geothermal, the VRF, and the traditional HVAC system that we have, and potential cost estimate from either White's estimators or ICI's estimators or both. That's what I heard.
That's in my head, our next step.
Yeah, so I would say, by our next meeting, which is the 8th, should we make a decision then, or is that too far off?
That's 3 weeks.
With regards to the mechanical stuff, correct, is that what we need?
Is that okay?
Is that long enough? Or no?
Yeah,
If it's not the time, that's the next time we're getting together for sure.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
think we should make that our target, yes.
In that case, it's 2 weeks because I need a week in advance in order to prepare the board.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, we'll put together the kind of the pro-con stuff. We'll work with our engineers to get some, they're working on narratives, definition, we'll call like narratives that describe the systems. Then we'll engage ICI in how they can assist in developing some costing. We'll collaborate with them on that. And then kind of come back to you on that next meeting with descriptions. And you should know that just like with phase 1, when we complete each design phase of the phase 2 project, ICI will be doing cost estimates. So we're tracking the construction cost, estimated construction cost of the project as we move through each major design phase so that we're adjusting and honing the design to meet the budget. And I think you had some good news tonight with your bids. That's the goal, is being deliberate about decisions we make as we move through the process.
and then that can be in our next meeting, do we then want to figure out what communications we need to go through then to talk referendum? I'm assuming, because you said we want to get going on that, I would say that later also,
Correct.
so,
I'll have some definitive plans for you on that by next meeting.
okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I was only asking about the bigger project because there is some economies to scale, especially talking projects and not mobilizing multiple years in a row. And I look at that, even though it seems overwhelming, it's not that big of a project. I mean, I know it sounds funny to say, but I mean, that's a year construction project right there. That 80% of it can be done while school's in session, being outdoors constructed. That's probably too much of a project, but I'm just saying, that's not like an enormous bill. That's why I was saying it's easier just to rip the Band-Aid off as far as a referendum goes. And plan a big project versus risking doing one phase, then getting the next one rejected, and then you kind of cut your plan off and delays your long-term plan.
Yeah, and Steve's right on that. When you look at this, at phase 2 completed, you're attaching it to current building in 3 locations. In those locations, you're not doing that work when school's not in session. But yeah, the rest of that, all that work will be done while we're in session. And I've personally lived through that a couple times. It's not a great environment all the time to have construction going on while you're in session, but it can be done. It's going to be done in phase 1 for sure.
Yeah, we cut the playground and stuff off though, but there.
true, there will be some logistical things for the building principals to work on in phase two, but it certainly is definitely doable. I'm not sure 12 months would do it, but I'm thinking 14 to 16. If I give myself the 2 summers on each end for the connections, I think that'll be fine. It certainly can be done.
I kind of agree with Steve too, in the sense of like, yeah, throw one big number out there and see where people kind of go. Because otherwise, like, if you keep going, you know, a little bit here, more money, and more money again, and more money again.
So there's the impression that we're getting.
Yeah, I don't know.
And we've been lucky, we've done our 2 projects without asking the community.
Yeah, we have that. And that north wing, something's gotta happen. I mean,
Right.
we gotta,
And that, even to do that, fix it, we have to get money from them, or, right, we can't do with the, or could we, and not that I want to, I'm just saying.
We really haven't done a cost out on what, on the north wings renovation to be, since that wasn't going to be the direction we were gonna ask for. We really haven't put that much time into defining what's gonna cost, but it's not gonna be under 7 figures.
and like you said, it doesn't make sense if we're not getting to renovate that, not getting what we need to out of it. I don't see why.
And also renovating it, remember, you are living in it while it's going on, so that work can only be done in times when school is not in session.
Yeah.
Because we need that space.
And then maybe the other factor, the eventual widening of the road and the current proximity to the road are both undesirable features. So by divesting from that part of the building, long-term it moves you away from the road.
Now, just, I mean, in this project, that would mean approximately 10 new, 11 new classrooms, with 5 strands per. So we know for sure we've got our 31-176 Woodlawn Estates is being built. That's happening. We're also suspecting another division to come up somewhere. And that would be the growth that we would get, because I'm just thinking like, I guess when we talk about rent, I mean, just when we look at trying to say, hey, we need the space, we need the growth, what are those factors that are going to impact us?
Certainly, so yes, Woodlawn is currently building. I haven't driven through there in a few months, but yes, they are still actively building houses and selling houses, and the majority of them are 46. Yes, there's another subdivision that is being planned on the Seeger property, Terracotta.
Valley Terracotta.
There's 118 home plan subdivision for there. It has been through the Village of Prairie Grove's zoning board. It has gone to, I'm not sure it's gone to the full village board for a vote yet. But I did have a conversation at length with the village leadership, the president of the village, their administrator and their attorney, and we did ask them to limit the growth per year to help us accommodate the growth rather than having them put up 118 houses in 18 months, to limit that to 25 to 30 homes per year so that we could more manage any kind of growth that comes out of that subdivision. I'm not sure where that stands here with the village. That was one of the things that we did ask for.
It's progressing, but there's a lot of
There's some hurdles.
runway in front of it that, these things die at any time, you never know.
Right, which is what's happened in the past, where they wanted to build another school up on, I think on Berryville or somewhere up there. There was all these plans for another school plot area. And there was supposed to be all this development there, so just trying to see what is going to be feeding into us. Just trying to understand.
Have you guys ever considered throwing anything, like I said, since we're building the gym, that big tall building there, going another level around the surrounding classrooms, just to go to save any type of real estate or anything has ever been tossed around?
I guess my thoughts on that are that you have a lot of property. So you're not pressured to go multi-story. And the configuration of this building, it's a little harder to do it and make a plan that's going to flow You'll build additional infrastructure such as elevators and stairs to build two-story. So there's potentially some disadvantages to, you've already got essentially a one-story campus, and you have land, which not all schools have. So I think this is one situation where a large one-story building does make sense. I don't think you'll save money if you go two-story. That is also.
I was just thinking, like, even phase one, look at the travel distance from the front door to phase one. You know, it's a pretty good hike. As we were going through this, I just kept thinking of how stretched, the building's getting pretty stretched out. Until it flips, then it makes more sense.
Yeah, I think what the goal has been with the organization of the two major kind of axes of circulation is to get the things that everybody shares central in the building. So although you are correct, there are some distances, the distance that students have to go from the furthest point to the things that they're going to utilize is not increasing and probably is more concentrated now than it was before, or will be reasonably effectively planned and concentrated. So good planning, you know, I think both working with the district and the principals and teachers and Dr. Butte, we've done everything we can to create as centralized of an organization as we can to help mitigate any concern about sprawl. Now, Steve, anything from your perspective to add to that?
No, I think you just said, like, all the common spaces of the building that either elementary kids are coming to or junior high, that's better defined.
Just for, you know, I walk this building every day, and I can tell you that walking from the extreme part of one building to get into this intersection takes about 90 seconds. I'm not speed walking up, and my strides are longer than a second grader. I get that. We do think, you know, going from the classrooms that are farthest away, it's going to take us 2.5 minutes, maybe 3, to get from point A to point C. Is that a huge amount of time? No. We think it's doable from where things are going to be in the middle, from where the cafeteria is located to where the student services are located to get to the classrooms. 90 seconds, like 2 minutes is pretty reasonable. We just casually walking to get there.
Question going back to the calendar side. With the special drop off, with the special drop off is going to be on the early childhood side. Is there, and I don't know if this, is there any concern relative to there being classrooms right by those doors? Is there a best, how does that work from a design standpoint?
Right about on that entrance. So that entrance kind of would be where the early childhood students come in. Their classrooms would be the first classrooms. So the only other students that are going to enter into that space would be kindergarten students. They're already, right now, they're already in the rooms. Kindergarten comes in first, EC comes in second, right? And then early childhood students leave, and then we have another group that comes in the afternoon. So as far as coming in and out, the kindergarten kids are already going to be in there. Early childhood's going to come and go before kindergarten leaves again.
Okay, so any other questions for tonight? Okay, so, well, thank you so much for your presentation and all the information.
Thank you for your.
You're turning it off, okay. May I have a motion to adjourn the special meeting at 9:05 p.m.? Stephanie? Josie? Okay, discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.